Mark Whitley stood at the door of his office, staring out of the window at the sprawling city below. The hum of the bustling streets seemed far away now. It was a city he had helped build with his own two hands, a city that had been home to him for over 35 years. But now, that world felt as distant as the horizon. "Mark," Richard Hamilton's voice echoed in the cold, sterile office. "We're downsizing." The words hit him like a slap in the face. Downsizing? Richard, the man he had trusted, the man he had served loyally for more than 3 decades, was tossing him aside like a worn-out tool. No gratitude. No thank you for the countless late nights, the missed holidays, the years of unwavering dedication. Just a cold, dismissive gesture. "You're fired," Richard continued, his voice almost indifferent, as if he were ordering a coffee rather than making a decision that would ruin a man's life. Mark's hands curled into fists, but he didn't react. He stood there, still and calm, though his insides churned. The office, once a place of pride and accomplishment, now felt like a prison. And Richard Hamilton, once a mentor and friend, now felt like the enemy. "You'll regret this, Richard," Mark said, his voice steady but filled with a quiet rage. Richard chuckled, a smug smile playing on his lips. "It's just business, Mark. You know that. It's nothing personal." Mark turned and walked out, leaving the office he had called home for decades behind. As he stepped into the elevator and descended to the ground floor, he couldn't help but think about the years that had just been erased in an instant. He had given everything to Hamilton and Company. And for what? A handshake and a few words of dismissal. The doors opened, and Mark stepped out into the bright daylight, but the world outside seemed foreign. He had no job, no purpose. For the first time in years, Mark felt like he was floating, adrift in a sea of uncertainty. At home, his wife Anna tried to console him, but even she couldn't mask her concern. The bills were piling up. Their son's college tuition was looming like a dark cloud. And Mark, once a proud provider, now found himself powerless. Days passed, and Mark's mind swirled with the weight of it all. But then, as he was digging through old files, trying to update his resume, he found something that would change everything. A forgotten folder, buried deep in his desk drawer. Inside were years of pay stubs, time cards, and emails. The evidence was undeniable. Richard Hamilton owed him millions in unpaid overtime. Mark had worked thousands of hours beyond the call of duty, and for what? A pat on the back? He couldn't let it go. This wasn't just about money. This was about justice. Justice for every late night, every sacrifice, every hour spent working while Richard Hamilton lived in luxury. He knew what he had to do. Mark sat at his kitchen table, the old folder spread out in front of him. His fingers traced the lines of numbers and dates, his mind racing faster than it had in years. He had the proof. But he needed more. A solid plan. A way to turn this evidence into a weapon sharp enough to cut down a giant like Richard Hamilton. He reached out to an old friend, Laura Benson, a sharp and fearless lawyer who had once worked for Hamilton and Company before she too had been quietly pushed out. Laura had seen firsthand how the company exploited its employees, how Richard smiled while tightening the noose around their necks. Over a quiet lunch at a small hidden cafe on the edge of the city, Mark laid it all out for her. Laura listened, her sharp eyes narrowing with every word. "This isn't just unpaid overtime, Mark," she said, tapping her finger on one of the documents. "This is systemic fraud. If we prove this, it won't just bring Hamilton down. It'll tear the entire company apart." Mark felt a rush of hope. For the first time in weeks, he saw a path forward, a way to fight back. But Laura warned him that it would not be easy. Richard had powerful friends, deep pockets, and a ruthless legal team. "You'll need more than just these papers," Laura said. "We need witnesses. People who will stand with you. People who are willing to risk everything." Mark nodded slowly. He knew just where to start. He still had friends inside the company. Friends who owed him favors. Friends who were just as angry as he was, only too scared to speak out. That night, Mark made a list. Names of people he trusted. People who might help him expose the rot festering inside Hamilton and Company. Every name he wrote down brought a new sense of purpose. A spark of the old Mark Whitley returned. A man who had once built dreams, not watched them crumble. He was not going to let Richard Hamilton win. The battle had just begun. Mark spent the next week moving cautiously through the city, reaching out to former colleagues one by one. Every meeting had to be planned with precision. Some conversations happened in parked cars, others in crowded cafes where whispers could hide among the noise. Trust had to be rebuilt carefully. Fear had left scars. Some refused. Too dangerous, they said. Too much to lose. Mark understood. He thanked them anyway, leaving no hard feelings behind. But there were others who leaned in when he spoke, anger flashing in their eyes. There was Daniel, a mid-level accountant who had kept quiet for years, suffocating under the weight of secrets. There was Priya, a project manager who had seen projects manipulated to cover financial holes. And then there was Evan, a shy IT technician who had stumbled across falsified records buried deep in the company's systems. Together, they formed the beginning of something powerful. A small group, but determined. They would be the voice for those who could not speak, the hand for those who had been silenced. Laura helped them organize their findings, turning scattered memories and hidden files into a growing arsenal of evidence. Each document, each story, each name strengthened their case. But with every step forward, the risk grew. One night, Mark found his car tires slashed. Another evening, Priya noticed a dark car following her home. Laura's office was broken into, though nothing obvious was stolen. It was a warning. They were being watched. Fear clawed at the edges of their resolve, but Mark gathered them together in an abandoned warehouse, the city lights glimmering distantly through cracked windows. He stood before them, fire in his voice. They want us scared. They want us to run. But we're not running. Not this time. If we don't stop Richard Hamilton now, no one will. Silence hung in the air, heavy and tense. Then one by one, they nodded. Agreement without words. A pact sealed by shared wounds and burning anger. The battle lines were drawn. They would not back down. The plan had to be flawless. One mistake, and it would all crumble. Laura and Mark spent long nights in front of glowing laptop screens, drawing up a roadmap. They knew Richard Hamilton had insulated himself well, with layers of managers, lawyers, and loyalists. Bringing him down would require more than proof. It would require precision. Their first move was to leak select documents anonymously to a few key journalists known for exposing corporate corruption. Enough to stir interest, but not enough to give away their hand. The media began to whisper. Quiet articles surfaced, questioning Hamilton and Co.'s rapid growth and sudden wealth. It was just a ripple, but it was growing. Meanwhile, Daniel and Priya worked from within. Daniel fed financial discrepancies to a government investigator he trusted. Priya unearthed old contracts that revealed conflicts of interest and hush payments. Evan, from his safe house, hacked into archived servers, recovering emails that connected Richard directly to illegal transactions. As the pressure built outside, inside the company walls paranoia spread like wildfire. Meetings became secretive. Phones were confiscated during gatherings. Hamilton himself grew erratic, demanding loyalty, rewarding suspicion, punishing doubt. It was everything Mark had hoped for. The next step was riskier. They needed Richard to act rashly, to make a mistake big enough that he couldn't hide behind his army of lawyers. Laura posed as an anonymous whistleblower and arranged a meeting with one of Richard's senior executives, pretending to offer sensitive information. Predictably, the executive took the bait. In a hidden room wired with cameras and microphones, Richard's right-hand man offered Laura a large sum of money to stay silent. And when she refused, he threatened her safety. The footage was dynamite. More than enough to trigger a criminal investigation. Mark watched the recording, heart pounding. They were so close now he could taste it. But Richard Hamilton was not a man who surrendered easily. And the closer they got, the more dangerous he would become. Richard Hamilton did not waste time. The morning after the leaked footage hit the hands of investigators, Hamilton and Co. launched an internal purge. Dozens of employees were fired without warning. Offices were raided under the guise of security checks. Computers were seized. Phones wiped clean. But it was too late. Laura, Mark, Daniel, Priya, and Evan had prepared for this. Copies of all evidence were safely stored in multiple locations. Backup identities were in place. Alibis rehearsed. Still, the danger was real. Late one evening, as Mark drove home, a black SUV followed him through the rain-slicked streets. When he tried to shake it off, it stayed glued to his rearview mirror. Only when he pulled into a crowded supermarket car park did it finally vanish. Laura received anonymous threats. Her apartment was broken into. Nothing stolen but her documents rifled through. Daniel's bank accounts were frozen without explanation. Priya's brother was approached by men in dark suits asking invasive questions. Richard was fighting back, and he was willing to burn everything to the ground to protect himself. Meanwhile, the authorities moved slowly. Too slowly. Investigators hinted at pressure from above. Legal loopholes were exploited. Witnesses recanted their statements. Mark realized they could not rely on the system to bring Richard down. They had to escalate. They decided to leak everything to the public. Emails, contracts, financial records, hidden camera footage, all packaged into one undeniable story. A storm so big that no amount of legal trickery could silence it. But first, they needed the final piece. The key to exposing Richard's personal involvement beyond all doubt. It was locked away in Richard's private server. And to get it, they would have to break into the lion's den. The plan was simple on paper. Laura and Evan would create a diversion outside Hamilton & Co. headquarters. Mark and Priya would infiltrate the building using stolen security badges. Daniel, stationed in a van nearby, would guide them through the labyrinth of offices using a hacked floor plan. Timing was critical. The operation began on a Thursday night, when most of the staff had already left. Laura triggered the fire alarm at the rear of the building, causing a controlled chaos. Security scrambled to manage the evacuation, unaware of the true threat slipping inside. Mark and Priya moved fast. Dressed like employees, they blended in with the crowd re-entering the building after the all-clear signal. Priya kept an eye on the surveillance feed Daniel had hijacked, whispering directions into Mark's earpiece. They navigated stairwells and service corridors until they reached the executive floor. There, behind a heavy oak door, was Richard's private server room. The lock was biometric. Mark pulled out a device Daniel had rigged, an advanced fingerprint replicator, made possible thanks to a stolen coffee mug Richard had carelessly discarded weeks earlier. The scanner blinked green. They were in. Inside, rows of servers hummed under cold blue lights. They found the terminal marked Private Files and inserted a special drive. The download began. Seconds stretched into eternity. Every beep from the servers felt deafening. Every shadow outside the glass wall seemed like a threat. Then footsteps. Guards. They were coming straight for the server room. Priya cussed under her breath. The download was only at 76%. "We need more time," Mark whispered. Priya looked at the terminal, then at the approaching figures on the security feed. "We don't have it," she said grimly. Mark made a decision. He grabbed the unfinished drive and yanked it from the terminal. Priya smashed the power supply unit, plunging the server room into darkness, erasing their trail. They sprinted through the emergency exit just as the guards burst into the room. Outside, rain poured in sheets, blending with the flashing lights of emergency vehicles arriving at the scene. In the van, Daniel was already pulling out of the parking lot, doors flung open, engine roaring. Mark and Priya dove in. As they sped away, Mark looked down at the drive in his hand. It was damaged. Possibly corrupted. And everything they had risked might have been for nothing. The van roared down the slick city streets, tires splashing water in every direction. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Mark placed the damaged drive on the dashboard. Daniel glanced at it briefly, a frown creasing his forehead. "How bad is it?" Laura asked from the back seat, her voice tight. Mark shook his head. "We won't know until we check." Daniel drove them to a safe house, a crumbling loft above a long-abandoned bookstore. It was the kind of place no one would think to look. The moment they arrived, Daniel connected the drive to an isolated laptop, one shielded from any internet connection. The screen flickered to life. The file directory appeared, corrupted and riddled with errors. Whole sections of data were missing, scrambled beyond recognition. Priya cussed under her breath. "Wait," Daniel said, squinting at the screen. "There's a recovery folder." He clicked it. Slowly, fragment by fragment, partial documents began to emerge. Financial statements, offshore accounts, internal memos, and then something more. Buried deep in the folders was a document marked Confidential, Project Obsidian. Laura leaned closer. Her heart was hammering in her chest. Daniel opened the file. It revealed a damning conspiracy. Richard Hamilton had been orchestrating illegal deals for over a decade. laundering money through fake charities, bribing government officials, running entire shell companies in countries with no extradition treaties. Proof. Enough to bring down Hamilton and Co. and everyone who shielded it. But there was a problem. The document was incomplete. Key pieces were still corrupted, names blurred, dates missing. Without the full document, it would be easy for Richard's legal team to claim it was fabricated. They needed the original, untouched copy. Laura clenched her fists. They would have to go back. This time, not to steal data, but to face Richard Hamilton himself. Night swallowed the city whole as Laura, Daniel, Mark, and Priya prepared for their final move. The plan was reckless, desperate even. But it was the only way. They needed to extract the original file directly from Richard's personal server, hidden deep inside Hamilton and Co.'s main office tower. A fortress guarded by layers of security. Laura tightened the straps on her small gear bag. Every step had led to this. Daniel handed out earpieces, his face grim. No improvisation. We stick to the plan. The team nodded. They moved through the service tunnels beneath the city, silent shadows against the crumbling brick walls. Laura's heart hammered against her ribs, but her focus was razor-sharp. At the building's foundation, Priya hacked into the old service elevator system, overriding the controls. They ascended slowly, bypassing the main security checkpoints. They emerged into the executive floors, silent and dimly lit. It was almost too easy. Laura led the way, winding through marble hallways and past gleaming glass offices. Then they saw him. Richard Hamilton. Standing in his corner office, back turned, staring out over the glittering skyline. Laura's throat tightened. This was it. They slipped inside, moving fast. Mark and Priya hacked into Richard's personal computer, their fingers flying across the keyboard. Laura stepped closer to Richard. He turned slowly, a smirk playing on his lips. I knew it would be you, he said softly. Daniel kept his stance firm, his hand near his side, ready for anything. Richard laughed under his breath. You think you can bring me down with a few stolen files? You have no idea who you're dealing with. We're not here to steal anymore, Laura said, her voice steady. We're here to expose you. Behind her, Mark gave a sharp nod. Download complete. Suddenly, the office door burst open. Armed guards flooded the room, weapons raised. Laura froze. Richard smiled wider. You never had a chance. Laura's instincts screamed at her to move, but she stood frozen as the guards fanned out, surrounding them. Richard's smug expression didn't waver. Daniel whispered sharply into his earpiece. Plan B. Now. Priya dropped a small device onto the floor, a black cylinder no bigger than a coffee mug. A sharp hiss filled the room. Thick, white smoke billowed outward, swallowing everything in seconds. Chaos exploded. Guards shouted, blind and disoriented. Laura grabbed Daniel's hand and pulled him towards the side exit while Mark and Priya clutched the hard drive containing the damning files. Coughing, stumbling, they pushed through the smoke, narrowly dodging gunfire that cracked against the glass walls. The group tumbled into the emergency stairwell. They ran. Floor after floor blurred past. The file was safe. But Richard was right behind them, barking orders, furious. As they reached the lobby, more security teams swarmed in. Laura's heart plummeted. They were trapped. She glanced at Daniel, his jaw tight with determination. We need a distraction, she rasped. Without hesitation, Mark broke away, sprinting towards a nearby security panel. Go! He shouted over his shoulder. Laura hesitated. For one burning second, she locked eyes with Mark, understanding what he meant. He wasn't coming with them. Daniel pulled her arm. Laura! Now! Tears stung her eyes as she turned away, running alongside Daniel and Priya toward the loading docks. Behind them, Mark triggered the panel. Alarms blared. Sprinklers rained down. Lights cut off. Mark bought them their escape. They burst out into the cold night air, sirens wailing behind them. But they had the proof. And now, nothing would ever be the same. Laura, Daniel, Dan Priya lay low for a few tense days, moving from safe house to safe house. The evidence they retrieved was explosive. Bribery. Fraud. Intimidation. Proof that Richard had built his empire on the backs of crushed competitors and silenced whistleblowers. But exposure wasn't enough. They needed a stage big enough to destroy him completely. That's when Priya's contact at a major broadcasting network came through. A live interview. Global coverage. Laura sat under bright studio lights, heart pounding but steady. Across from her, the journalist nodded, giving her the cue to begin. Laura spoke clearly, laying out Richard's crimes. Names. Dates. Documents. Everything. Meanwhile, Priya uploaded all the supporting evidence online. The story went viral within minutes. Corporate investors pulled out. Government agencies launched investigations. Former employees came forward with their own damning testimonies. Richard's empire crumbled in real time, broadcast for the whole world to see. Somewhere deep inside Laura, the years of humiliation, manipulation, and betrayal began to peel away. Daniel squeezed her hand tightly after the broadcast ended. "We did it," he said, voice rough with emotion. Priya smiled, tears shining in her eyes. Outside the studio, the first light of dawn colored the sky pink and gold. It wasn't over. Not really. They knew there would be battles ahead. But for the first time in years, Laura felt powerful. Free. Unbreakable. This was not the end. This was the beginning.